As of today, this house belongs to us. Everyone else, leave immediately, declared a group of unexpected relatives who showed up uninvited. It had only been a few days since Bradley passed away, and suddenly, 9 people, relatives I had never met, appeared, claiming the house was theirs. I couldn't help but laugh at their audacity. The clueless expressions on their faces turned to suspicion as they demanded an explanation. "Don't you know?" I said, looking them directly in the eye. "This house is already mine." With confidence, I revealed the wish that Bradley had entrusted to me before his death. Their smug faces turned pale as the truth sank in. "My name is Hazel Thompson, and I'm 52 years old. I work as a kitchen staff member at a popular Chinese restaurant in town." "Hazel, can you stay late and cover a shift today?" my manager asked one evening. "No, I'm sorry, I can't. I've already explained why," I replied firmly but politely. The manager nodded, understanding. "That's right. Your husband's still in the hospital. We'll find someone else to cover. Go home on time. Take care of yourself, Hazel." Our restaurant is well loved for its affordability and delicious food, attracting crowds of customers daily. Though I used to be flexible with overtime shifts, my husband Bradley's worsening health had changed everything. Bradley, 2 years older than me, had been my husband for over 30 years. He was a kind and gentle man, but a few months ago, he was diagnosed with advanced cancer. By the time it was discovered, the disease had metastasized, and his physical strength began to deteriorate rapidly. "It's because I worked from home too much," he'd say with a weak smile, trying to lighten the mood. Bradley had worked as a freelance interior coordinator, completing projects on his computer from the comfort of our home. His career allowed me to work outside the house without worrying about chores, as he took care of most of them. But now, the roles were reversed. Since his diagnosis, I had adjusted my work schedule. I started my shifts early in the morning and left before the dinner rush, so I could spend as much time as possible caring for him. I explained my situation to my colleagues and manager, who were surprisingly understanding. "Hazel, you've got nothing to apologize for," one of my coworkers said with a warm smile.
"Exactly.
"Take care of Bradley and don't let this stress you out. We've got your back," added another, laughing in a way that was meant to comfort me. Their kindness made it easier to handle the weight of my responsibilities, and I did my best to remain cheerful for Bradley's sake. Even as life became more challenging, I held on to the love and support I found in those around me, never imagining the storm that would arrive after Bradley's passing. When I shared my situation with my colleagues, they accepted it without hesitation. Many even encouraged me to leave earlier if I needed to, showing a level of support I hadn't expected. My manager, concerned about the financial impact of reduced hours on me, carefully rearranged the shifts to ensure I could still manage. I felt incredibly fortunate to work in such an understanding and compassionate environment. I promised myself that when life returned to normal, I would properly repay their kindness. With this thought in mind, I thanked my coworkers, signed out, and quickly made my way to the hospital to see Bradley. As soon as I arrived, a kind nurse greeted me warmly. "Mrs. Thompson, the doctor is in with your husband right now." Her words quickened my steps. I hurried to Bradley's room, where I found him in conversation with the doctor. Your wife is here," the doctor said, turning toward me. Bradley's eyes lit up weakly. "You're here. Thanks for finishing up at work and coming by." Bradley, 2 years my senior, had always been youthful in appearance. Friends and strangers alike often mistook him for being younger than me. But now, the cancer had stolen that vitality. His face, gaunt and pale, betrayed how much he had aged in just a few months. "I won't let this illness beat me," he had said with a brave smile when we first got the diagnosis. But time had chipped away at that optimism. His body grew frailer and his energy waned. Each day, it was as if the weight of the disease carved away a little more of him. "I was just updating your husband on his condition," the doctor explained gently. "How is he?" I asked quickly, my voice shaky, but steady enough to show my concern. Before the doctor could respond, Bradley interrupted. "Let me tell her myself." An uneasy feeling crept over me. The doctor hesitated, exchanging a glance with Bradley before excusing himself quietly and leaving the room. Bradley turned toward the window, his gaze distant. "Hazel," he began, "how much time do you think we've spent together since we got married?" The question, so unexpected, tugged at my heart. I hesitated before replying. 30 years. 30 years, he echoed, his voice soft. It feels like a long time, but now that I think about it, it's gone by in the blink of an eye. I try to stop him, my voice faltering. "Don't talk like that. It sounds like you're giving up." He shook his head and continued, as if I hadn't spoken. "Maybe another 6 months, he murmured, his tone resigned but calm. The air in the room felt heavy as his words sank in. I wanted to protest, to tell him not to give up hope, but he avoided my gaze, speaking quietly as though the truth was something only he could accept. Bradley's words cut through me like a knife. "Just hold on for another 6 months, he had said, his voice calm but laced with finality. "Maybe sooner. I know my body better than anyone." His faint smile didn't soften the impact of his statement. My worst fears felt realized in that moment, and I couldn't stop the tears from spilling down my cheeks. Bradley noticed and gave a small, apologetic chuckle as he reached out to gently wipe my tears away. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice trembling. "I promised when we got married that I would never make you cry." But his own eyes glistened with unshed tears, and that only made me cry harder. My chest heaved as I struggled to speak. "Don't say things like that," I choked out, my voice raw with emotion. He gave a sad, trembling smile. "I'll need to apologize to your parents too. Once I'm gone, I'll tell them how sorry I am for making their daughter cry." "Stop it," I practically shouted, shaking my head furiously. The idea of him leaving me, of facing the rest of my life alone, was unbearable. We had promised each other that we would face everything together, that we would stay side by side no matter what. To hear him speak as if he had already accepted his fate filled me with a helpless, burning anger. "Don't talk like it's all decided," I pleaded. "Don't say such sad things, Bradley. Nothing has been decided yet. Medical science is advancing every day. There might be new treatments, new options. If we search harder, But Bradley cut me off gently, squeezing my hand with a touch so light it broke my heart. "Hazel," he said quietly, "I'll be leaving this world soon." I cried, my voice rising in desperation. "I hate that idea. I won't let you give up." He pulled me closer, holding my trembling hand as his own voice cracked with emotion. "Hazel," he whispered, "I don't want to spend my remaining time in the hospital. I want to go home, to spend my last days with you. I don't want to waste the time I have left being poked and prodded by machines. Before it's too late, I want to do the things I've always wanted to do. I want to cherish every moment with you until the end." His frail posture and resolute tone pierced my heart. It was as though the finality of his words were forcing me to confront a reality I had been desperately trying to avoid. "I know you're busy with work," he continued, his voice soft but firm. "But could you take a few days off? I want to go on the trip we'd planned years ago, the one we kept putting off." His request wasn't grandiose or filled with unrealistic dreams. It was simple, heartfelt, and deeply human. "Please, Hazel," he said, his hand trembling in mine. "Let's spend this time together." I nodded through my tears, unable to speak. His resolve had broken through my denial, leaving me no choice but to accept what I feared most. Yet, amidst the pain, I also knew one thing. I would do everything in my power to make his final days as beautiful and meaningful as possible. "I'll do whatever you wish, Bradley," I whispered. "I promise." Accepting Bradley's wishes, I respected his decision, though it broke my heart. With great effort, I held back my tears and conveyed his intentions to his doctor. The doctor, understanding and compassionate, supported our choice and promptly arranged for his discharge. Bradley underwent a few final tests for safety, and the next day, he was allowed to leave the hospital. Thus began Bradley's final days outside the confines of the hospital walls. "Bradley, I came to visit. Hey, how are you feeling? Ready to head to the other world yet?" "Just kidding." The voice grated on my nerves instantly. Bradley's brother, Marcus, barged into the room, his loud, inappropriate humor as unwelcome as always. Behind him trailed his wife, Rita, and their mother. Marcus was 55, yet his behavior could easily rival that of an unruly teenager. He worked in construction but skipped shifts frequently, holding no steady position. His wife, Rita, was a striking woman of 34, but her beauty was overshadowed by her harsh demeanor and sharp tongue. She had made it clear from the moment we met that she viewed me as an enemy, always taking any opportunity to aim her passive-aggressive comments my way. And then there was Bradley's mother. Despite being 74, she radiated energy, though her features betrayed her relentless greed. She doted on Marcus obsessively, while openly belittling Bradley, treating him as though he were little more than a walking wallet. Hazel, Marcus said, feigning surprise upon noticing me. I didn't know you'd be here too. Thought I'd just be chatting with Brad. Marcus, it's been a while, I said curtly, my patience already wearing thin. We still had time before dinner, and I had planned to spend the afternoon with Bradley, cherishing what little time we had left. But his family's unannounced visit made that impossible. It's pretty crowded here today, Bradley said weakly, attempting a small smile. Rita's sharp voice cut in before he could say more. What an attitude, Bradley. Isn't it cold to treat your own mother like this? You should take better care of her. She's been lonely ever since your father passed away. My jaw clenched as I listened to her, knowing full well the truth of the situation. Bradley's mother hadn't been lonely. She had been overbearing, entitled, and increasingly manipulative since her husband's passing. Before his death, Bradley's father had been a voice of reason, keeping the family grounded. He was strict but fair, and his presence had maintained a fragile harmony. But once he was gone, all restraint seemed to vanish. His mother's incessant demands for money became the norm, and any pretense of treating me with civility was abandoned. Marcus has such a large family to support, she said, her voice dripping with fake concern. But you two don't have kids. And you both work. Surely, you've got some financial leeway to help out a bit. It was always the same, veiled guilt trips disguised as casual comments. Marcus's household, now a family of 9, was constantly struggling financially. He had 4 children from his first marriage and 2 more with Rita, leaving them perpetually in debt and always looking to us for handouts. Your mom has been so lonely, Bradley, Marcus added, as though trying to justify their uninvited visit. Don't you think it's about time you stepped up? She's your mom, after all. It took everything in me to bite my tongue. This wasn't the time or place for an argument, but their behavior was maddening. They saw Bradley not as a person, but as a bank account they could tap into whenever they pleased. Bradley, ever patient, simply sighed and tried to change the subject. But as I watched his thin, frail frame in the hospital bed, I couldn't help but feel a surge of anger. He deserved better than this, not just from them, but from the life that had treated him so unfairly. As soon as the words left my mouth, the room erupted. This month is financially tight again, Marcus began, his tone shameless and casual. Could you give us a little support? My patience snapped. What? I demanded, glaring at him. Bradley is already struggling so much. What are you thinking, coming here with these demands? Marcus waved me off like an annoying gnat. Please be quiet. This is a family matter, he said dismissively. That's right, Rita added with a mocking smile, crossing her arms and smirking at me. Fury boiled inside me. Sorry, but we really can't afford to give you any money, I said firmly, determined to end the conversation. Oh, that's troublesome, Bradley's mother muttered, her tone dripping with disdain. I thought you would figure something out. That's why I came all this way. What a useless son. Her cruel words cut through the air, and I clenched my fists at her audacity. My husband, her own son, was lying in a hospital bed, battling terminal cancer, and yet she had the gall to call him useless? My in-laws didn't even flinch. Instead, Marcus leaned forward, his face contorted with faux concern. So, what's the situation exactly? He asked. How is the cancer progressing? And what are the plans for his discharge? I knew this wasn't genuine concern. There was something calculating in their tone, and it made my stomach turn. He has 6 months to live, I said, my voice breaking slightly. He's planning to be discharged tomorrow to spend his final days at home. There was a beat of silence. And then, to my horror, their eyes lit up, not with sadness or sympathy, but with some twisted form of excitement. Is that so? Bradley's mother said, her tone disturbingly cheerful. My nausea rose as I watched their expressions shift, the greed in their faces unmistakable. Well then, Marcus said, his voice practically gleeful. We'll come pick him up by car when he's discharged. He can't walk back after all. There's no need for that, Bradley replied calmly, his weak voice cutting through their chatter. But they didn't seem to hear him, too engrossed in their plans. Their behavior was revolting, and I couldn't take it anymore. Get out, I shouted, my voice trembling with fury. What are you doing? Marcus yelled as I marched toward the door and flung it open. Go home, I said, my tone ice-cold. I'll handle everything. Your presence is not needed, and frankly, I never want to see you all again. What are you saying? His mother sputtered, trying to push back. But I wasn't going to argue. I grabbed the door, slammed it shut, and turned the lock with a sharp twist. For a moment, the only sound was my own heavy breathing. Behind the door, I could hear their muffled protests, but I ignored them, leaning against the frame as the weight of the confrontation settled over me. Bradley, who had remained quiet through the chaos, gave me a small, knowing smile. Thank you, Hazel, he said softly. You've always been my strongest ally. Tears welled in my eyes, but I swallowed them back. I wouldn't let him see me cry, not now. Always, Bradley, I said, squeezing his hand. Always. After Bradley's passing, I was consumed by grief, but also felt an unrelenting determination to fulfill the promise I had made to him. His family, who had shown little more than greed and selfishness during his final days, was not going to tarnish his memory or exploit what he had left behind. The day after his funeral, the dreaded moment came. Marcus, Rita, and Bradley's mother arrived at our home, their intentions obvious. As of today, this house is ours, Marcus declared smugly, standing in the living room like he owned it.
Rita smírked.
And Bradley's mother nodded in agreement, as if this had been decided long ago. I couldn't help but laugh at their audacity. Their entitled attitude didn't surprise me, but it was still infuriating. Don't you know? I said, crossing my arms and looking them square in the eyes. This house is already mine. Their faces froze in confusion, their smug confidence quickly replaced by suspicion. What are you talking about?
Rita snapped.
This house belonged to Bradley, and as his family, we have the right to inherit it. I pulled out a folder from a nearby drawer and placed it on the coffee table. Actually, Bradley ensured that wouldn't happen. He transferred ownership of this house to me before he passed away. He knew exactly what you were planning. They stared at the papers in disbelief, their faces draining of color as they scanned the documents. Bradley had been thorough, and the legal paperwork left no room for argument. This can't be real, Marcus stammered, his hands shaking as he held the documents. It's real, I said firmly. Bradley made his wishes clear. He entrusted everything to me, his house, his belongings, and his final request to protect his legacy from vultures like you. Bradley's mother tried to argue, her voice trembling with anger. I'm his mother. I have a right. You lost that right when you treated him as nothing more than a source of money, I interrupted. You didn't care about him when he was alive. You only cared about what you could take from him. Well, now you'll get nothing. Rita glared at me, her composure slipping. You think you can just keep everything for yourself? This isn't about keeping anything, I shot back. This is about respecting Bradley's wishes, something you never did. I stood my ground, and after a heated exchange, they finally realized there was nothing they could do. Defeated, they stormed out of the house, muttering threats and insults under their breath. As the door slammed behind them, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. I had fulfilled Bradley's final request, ensuring that his greedy family couldn't exploit his death. Sitting alone in the quiet house, I looked at the photographs we had taken during his last days, the smiles, the laughter, the love that had defined our time together. This house wasn't just a place to live, it was a sanctuary of memories, a testament to the life we had built together. And now it was truly mine. Rest easy, Bradley, I whispered. I've taken care of everything, just like you asked. From that day forward, I vowed to honor his memory by living my life with the same strength and love he had shown me every day. The smugness evaporated from their faces in an instant. My mother-in-law's smile faltered, and Marcus's jaw dropped. I reached over to the coffee table and picked up a folder I had prepared in anticipation of this exact moment. Holding it up for them to see, I said, Bradley transferred ownership of this house to me before he passed away. Here are the legal documents, signed and notarized. This house doesn't belong to him anymore. It's mine. They froze, their confidence replaced by disbelief. My mother-in-law snatched the will she had been waving around and squinted at it, as if rereading it might magically change the outcome. That can't be possible, Marcus blurted. You must have tricked him. This house was supposed to stay in the family. No one tricked anyone, I said firmly. Bradley made this decision willingly. He wanted to ensure that his family, the one that actually cared for him, was protected after he was gone. You've gone too far, Rita spat, stepping forward, her anger flaring. Do you think you can just kick us out like this? Actually, yes, I replied coolly. Legally, I can. But let's not make this uglier than it already is. Take your things and leave now. My mother-in-law's face turned red with fury. This isn't over, she hissed. We'll fight this in court. You'll regret this. You're welcome to try, I said, unbothered. But I'd advise you to read this folder carefully before wasting your money on lawyers. Everything is airtight. Bradley made sure of that. Marcus grabbed his mother's arm and whispered something, clearly trying to calm her down. Rita, however, was still glaring at me with venom in her eyes. You've humiliated us, she said bitterly. You think you've won, but you haven't seen the last of us. I crossed my arms, standing my ground. If that's what you need to tell yourself, fine. But you're not stepping one foot into this house. Not today, not ever. Reluctantly, they turned and began gathering their bags. As they shuffled away, I couldn't help but feel a mix of emotions, relief, anger, and even a tinge of sadness for how far they'd fallen. When the door closed behind them, I leaned against it, exhaling deeply. Bradley's trust in me had been my strength during this ordeal, and now I had fulfilled my promise to protect what he left behind. As I stood in the quiet house, I whispered softly, Rest in peace, Bradley. They'll never hurt us again. My lawyer, a sharp and composed woman named Linda, walked into the living room, her presence commanding instant attention. She set her briefcase on the coffee table and gave Marcus and my mother-in-law a curt nod before turning to me. Mrs. Thompson, thank you for your patience, she said, glancing briefly at the crowd in my living room. I understand there's been some confusion about the estate. Shall we clarify things? Marcus and Rita exchanged uneasy glances while my mother-in-law sat rigidly, her hands clutching the so-called will she'd brought. Linda noticed it immediately and asked, May I see that? My mother-in-law hesitated, but eventually handed it over. Linda examined it briefly, then set it on the table with a faint smile. This document isn't valid. It lacks a signature, witnesses, and proper legal acknowledgement. It has no standing in court. What do you mean, no standing? Marcus demanded, his voice rising. Bradley wrote it himself. That proves his intentions. Linda remained unfazed. Intentions aren't enough in the eyes of the law. What matters is the legal ownership of the house. And as my client has already explained, that ownership was transferred to her before Mr. Thompson's passing. Here are the notarized documents to confirm this. She slid a copy of the ownership transfer papers across the table. Marcus grabbed them, his face darkening as he read the contents. His wife Rita leaned over his shoulder, her expression souring further with each word. This is ridiculous.
Rita snapped.
glaring at me. You manipulated him into giving you the house. Admit it. I manipulated no one, I replied calmly, meeting her gaze. Bradley made this decision because he trusted me to handle things responsibly, especially knowing the kind of demands he'd face from you after his passing. How dare you, my mother-in-law barked, slamming her hand on the table. This is a family matter. You had no right to take what belongs to us. Linda intervened smoothly. Mrs. Thompson acted entirely within her rights as Bradley's wife. The transfer was done legally and transparently. If you wish to contest it, you're welcome to file a case in court, but I assure you, it will not hold up under scrutiny. The room fell into tense silence. My mother-in-law, Marcus, and Rita were clearly calculating their next move, but the weight of the evidence against them was impossible to ignore. The children, oblivious to the drama, peeked into the room, their curiosity barely concealed. Marcus finally stood, his hands clenched into fists. You think you've won? This isn't over, he said through gritted teeth. We'll find a way to fight this. Linda raised an eyebrow, unimpressed. You're welcome to try, but I'd advise against wasting your resources. The law is on Mrs. Thompson's side. Please show yourselves out, I said firmly, my voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through me. This house is not yours, and it never will be. Rita opened her mouth to argue, but my mother-in-law silenced her with a sharp glare. With one final look of contempt, they gathered their things and stormed out, the children trailing behind in confused silence. As the door slammed shut, I exhaled deeply, the tension in my chest finally easing. Thank you, Linda, I said, turning to my lawyer. Of course, she replied with a reassuring smile. Let me know if they cause any further trouble. But for now, I think they've gotten the message. When she left, I stood alone in the quiet living room, feeling a strange mix of relief and sadness. Bradley had trusted me to protect what he left behind, and I'd done exactly that. This house was mine, not just legally, but as a symbol of the life we'd built together. And now, it was free of those who had tried to take it away. I whispered softly, I kept my promise, Bradley. As the suited man stepped into the room, the tension in the air thickened. Marcus and the rest of my in-laws exchanged wary glances, their initial arrogance replaced by guarded hostility. This is Mr. Russell, I said, introducing the man calmly. The lawyer who has been assisting me with Bradley's estate matters. A lawyer? My mother-in-law blurted, her voice tinged with both surprise and unease. Russell gave her a polite nod before setting his briefcase on the coffee table and opening it with deliberate precision. His composed demeanor seemed to unnerve my in-laws even further. Let's address the issues you've raised, Russell began smoothly. First, the question of property ownership. As of 6 months ago, this house and all associated assets were legally transferred to Mrs. Thompson. I have the official documents here. He laid out the paperwork, sliding it across the table for them to see. My mother-in-law and Marcus grabbed the pages, their faces paling as they scanned the notarized deed. This can't be right, Marcus sputtered. We have Bradley's will, his real will. Without missing a beat, Russell produced another document from his briefcase. I'm glad you mentioned that. Here is the most recent and legally binding will drafted by Mr. Thompson. It explicitly names Mrs. Thompson as the sole beneficiary of all his assets. Any earlier documents, including the one you're claiming, are now null and void. The room fell silent as they processed this bombshell, but Russell wasn't done. Additionally, he continued, we have evidence that your supposed will was fabricated. This includes video footage of you coercing Mr. Thompson during his hospital stay, which I trust you'll agree renders it inadmissible in any legal proceedings. At this, my in-laws' confidence crumbled entirely. Marcus looked panicked, his bravado gone. Rita's face flushed as she stammered excuses, while my mother-in-law's haughty demeanor dissolved into poorly concealed anxiety. We didn't mean any harm, my mother-in-law said suddenly, her voice wavering. We were just trying to…
To what?
I cut her off, my voice steady but sharp. To steal from your own family? To manipulate a dying man for your benefit? Please, Rita added, her tone desperate. We didn't know it would go this far. We're sorry.
No, y interrupta firmly.
You're not sorry for what you did. You're sorry you got caught. Russell stood beside me, his presence a silent reassurance as I faced them. You've shown nothing but selfishness and cruelty. You disrespected Bradley in life and tried to exploit his death. I will not forgive that. Now, I said, gesturing to the door, leave my house. And don't come back. Defeated, they gathered their bags and shuffled out, their heads bowed in shame. My mother-in-law turned briefly at the doorway, as if to say something, but I met her gaze with unyielding resolve, and she thought better of it. The door closed behind them, leaving the house quiet at last. Russell turned to me with a nod. If they try anything else, let me know immediately. But I suspect this will be the end of it. Thank you, Mr. Russell, I said, my voice soft but resolute. For everything. As I stood in the now empty living room, I felt a weight lift from my chest. Bradley's wishes had been honored, and the home we'd built together was finally free of their toxicity. I glanced at the photo of Bradley on the mantel and whispered, "It's over, love." I kept my promise. Russell and I watched through the window as they trudged away, defeated. Once they were out of sight, I locked the door firmly and let out a long, relieved sigh. At last, the ordeal was over. Russell, ever meticulous, began preparing the next steps immediately. I asked him to proceed with filing for damages, a measure we had discussed in advance. True to form, he had already laid the groundwork, and the process unfolded smoothly. The court found their coercive behavior toward Bradley reprehensible, and they were ordered to pay $30,000 in damages. Unable to afford such a hefty sum, my in-laws begged for leniency, proposing various settlement options. But I held firm. After everything they had done, I refused to negotiate. They would face the full consequences of their actions. The ruling upended their lives. Marcus and Rita were forced into relentless, grueling jobs to make payments. My mother-in-law, no longer supported by her schemes, now had to shoulder the responsibility of raising 6 children on her own, struggling from morning to night. They sold their family home and moved into a cramped apartment where all 9 of them lived in tight quarters. Their financial situation grew dire, and it was clear their hardships would persist for years, at least until their youngest child reached adulthood. As for me, I severed all ties with them, shutting the door on that toxic chapter for good. After sorting through Bradley's belongings and preserving the items that held meaning to us, I chose to remain in our home. It was not just a house, but a sanctuary, a place that carried the warmth and love we had built together over the years. I returned to my work routine, finding comfort in the rhythm of daily life. My friends and colleagues from the restaurant often visited, filling the house with laughter and company. Their kindness ensured that I was never truly lonely. Every evening, I stand before Bradley's portrait, sharing the events of my day as though he were sitting right there with me. It's a ritual that connects us across the divide between life and death, a promise I made on one of our final days together. Before Bradley passed, he shared a deeply personal wish with me. His voice, though weak, carried a tender certainty. "I've always loved our conversations, Hazel," he said. "Your voice brings me peace. Promise me, even after I'm gone, that you'll keep talking to me every day. I want to hear you, no matter where I am. Even in heaven." In those bittersweet moments, I promised him with all my heart that I would honor his wish. And now, not a single day passes without me speaking to him. Whether the day has been joyful, mundane, or challenging, I share it all with him, keeping our bond alive. Until the day I join him in the next life, I'll keep this promise, ensuring that my voice always finds its way to him, no matter the distance.